He spent 3 years writing a story about a villain. He killed him with his own hands in the final chapter, then transmigrated into that villain's body. But the longer he lived inside that story, the more he realized the villain wasn't who he thought. The victim wasn't who he thought. And those 3 years of writing weren't imagination. They were memories of a life he had already lived and never got to say the most important thing. 3:17 a.m. Ming An typed with only 2 index fingers. The other 8 had gone numb. The laptop screen cast blue light across his face. His 8th cup of coffee had gone cold. Bai Ye looked at Shen Ling one last time. No pleading, no resentment, just exhaustion. Ming An paused. Was he being too cruel? Then reconsidered. Whatever. He's the villain. Death is the end. He kept typing. Shen Ling's sword came down. Bai Ye didn't dodge. It was the first time in his life he hadn't tried to avoid something. He typed one more line, hand trembling. The end. Then Ctrl+S. The longest exhale of 3 years. His eyes closed. Then, nothing. He didn't know when he hit the floor. One thought before everything went dark. At least the file is saved. Incense. Not cold coffee, not instant noodles. Incense. The kind from high-budget historical dramas, carved wooden ceiling, silk curtains, embroidered pillows. Clearly ancient, clearly wealthy. Ming An ran the checklist. Transmigration? Ancient? Male body? Still alive? He pinched his arm. It hurt. Then he saw the bronze mirror in the corner, the face in it. High nose bridge, long upturned eyes, thin lips, sharp chin. Beautiful in a cold, cutting way. The kind of face that makes an audience think, this character is going to cause trouble. He knew this face. He had drawn it, erased 7 times, described it in chapter 3, 11, 42, and finally chapter 79, the scene where Bai Ye closed his eyes beneath Shen Ling's sword. This was Bai Ye, the villain, the one supposed to die in chapter 80, the one Ming An had just killed 3 hours ago. He sat down on the floor and spent 5 minutes thinking about nothing, then looked up at the mirror and said, unnervingly calm, "All right, the issue is, I just killed you 3 hours ago." Bai Ye in the mirror didn't answer. Of course he didn't. No time to panic. Ming An was a writer. He knew when to sit down and work. He closed his eyes and sorted through 2 sources. Bai Ye's body memories. Faint, fragmented, like a buffering video. And the 79 chapters he had written, much clearer, unfortunately. Assessment. Bai Ye, 23, second son of a declining clan. No inheritance, no backing, surviving only through his connection to Shen Ling, the most powerful figure in the capital. The problem? According to the original plot, Bai Ye would betray Shen Ling, get caught, and die in chapter 80, roughly 1 year from now. 7 unavoidable plot points. 7 traps he had set himself. I wrote this plot kind of cruelly. The first, in 3 days, someone from a rival faction would approach him to become a spy. Good news, no system forcing him to follow the original plot. Bad news, no idea what happens if he doesn't. He picked up a brush on holding it completely wrong and wrote out a survival plan. First line, do not die, solid foundation. Second line, do something about the next 3 days. He hadn't gotten to the third when the door opened. Ming An shoved the paper under the inkstone. The person who entered, dark navy official robes with gold trim, hair in a high bun, jade pendant swaying. You didn't need to see his face. Just the way he walked into a room, as though it had always been his. Shen Ling. The male lead. The one who was going to kill Bai Ye in chapter 80. All 79 chapters broadcast in Ming An's head. Cold, suspicious, terrifyingly intelligent. Looks at people like chess pieces. Shen Ling sat down without asking permission. Looked at Ming An, said nothing. Just observed. I need to pour tea. Chapter 13. He picked up the teapot. Hands slightly unsteady. He poured, a little off. Tea spilled over the cup. Shen Ling looked at the cup, looked at the spill, said nothing. Ming An sat down, back straight, hands on knees, perfect. Then 15 seconds of being stared at him, and he blurted out, "Do I look strange?" Shen Ling raised an eyebrow, then repeated just one word. "I." Ming An froze. Wrong. Bai Ye used formal speech. He corrected himself, stumbling. "Do I look strange?" "You've been different lately." Not an answer. An observation. Flat, like commenting on the weather. He'd only been here a few hours, spilled the tea once, slipped up once, and Shen Ling had already noticed. I underwrite this character. They talked. Shen Ling spoke. Ming An listened. But he couldn't stop looking at Shen Ling, not because he was attractive, though he was. But in 3 years of writing this character, he had never actually looked at him. On the page, Shen Ling was just adjectives. Cold, suspicious, a narrative tool. The person sitting across from him was different. Real. With the way he looked at you without blinking. The way his fingers tapped lightly when thinking. The pauses between sentences just slightly longer than necessary. Ming An was so absorbed he didn't notice Shen Ling had stopped speaking. "Are you even listening?" He startled. "You're more attractive than I imagined." 3 seconds of silence. "I know," Shen Ling said. Then stood, straightened his robes, and walked out as though nothing unusual had happened. The door closed. Ming An pressed his face onto the desk. Chapter 1 is done, and I actually said that out loud. That night, Ming An was struggling to write Chinese characters. Bai Ye's body knew how, but Ming An's hands had never held a brush. When there was a knock at the door, the person who entered, a young woman around 18, servant's clothes, alert eyes, carrying a tray of evening tea, a Jew, Bai Ye's closest attendant, serving since age 14. In the original story, she barely appeared. She set down the tray, poured the tea. "Young master isn't resting tonight? Can't sleep." A Jew glanced at the paper covered in nearly illegible characters. 1 second, 2, said nothing, turned to tidy up. Ming An quietly exhaled, then, "Young master, your handwriting looks like someone who has never learned to write. I'm tired. My hands are shaking. Yes. Calm." He bent back down. Then, "Young master, this morning when Lord Shen visited, you referred to yourself as I." Ming An set down the brush. "And when pouring tea, you held the pot with your left hand. You have always used your right hand since childhood." Silence. Crickets outside. "You were sitting cross-legged on the bed. Young master has disliked that since he was small." A Jew lowered her head. "And when you looked in the mirror this morning, you looked like someone seeing their own face for the very first time." Ming An looked at her for a long time. A Jew didn't look up, didn't step away, just waited. "What are you going to do? Report to Lord Shen? Send me away?" "Before this happened," a Jew said slowly, "young master left this servant a letter." Ming An straightened. It said, "Someone will come to take my place, help them survive. Tell no one." "Bai Ye, he knew?" A Jew nodded. "He knew several days before. This servant doesn't know how, only that his instructions were very clear." "Did he say why?" "Only one final line. Help them find the answer I never had time to find." That night, for the first time since transmigrating, Ming An didn't think about his survival plan. He thought about Bai Ye, about someone who had known their own fate, and instead of running, sat down to write a letter for whoever came after. He had written Bai Ye as a petty villain for no real reason. Now he wasn't sure he had ever known this person at all. The next morning, a Jew had already set out breakfast. Ming An sat down, looked at the bowl of congee, not particularly hungry, but knowing he had to eat. "Ah, Jew, that letter, do you still have it?" She reached into her sleeve and took out a small piece of paper, folded into quarters, placed it on the table and pushed it toward him. Small handwriting, firm strokes, slightly slanted right, completely different from what Ming An had practiced writing. This was Bai Ye's real handwriting. A Jew. You have been loyal to me for many years. That is why I am asking this of you. Before long, I will no longer be myself. Do not be afraid. It is not something bad, or at least I hope so. Someone will come to take my place. They will not know many things I know, will do wrong many things I do right, and perhaps will do right the things I did wrong. Help them. Tell no one. Help them find the answer I never had time to find. Bai Ye. Ming An finished reading, folded it, stared at it. When did he write this? 3 days before the change. Did he seem normal? More normal than usual. He sat and wrote for a long time, then gave it to me, then went to sleep. She hesitated, like a person who had finished what needed to be done. A person who had finished what needed to be done. Ming An thought of the night he had typed the last line of chapter 79, strangely calm, and closed his eyes. Something tightened in his chest. The answer he never had time to find. Can you guess what he meant? In his final days, young master often sat alone for a very long time. Once this servant heard him say something quietly. What did he say? If I say it, will he believe me? He, meaning Shen Ling, the original Bai Ye, had something he wanted to say, but never got to. Then vanished, making way for Ming An. Was there anything else he left behind? A wooden box? A locked drawer? Anything? She walked to the cabinet, opened the bottom drawer, and took out a small wooden box with a plum blossom carved on the lid. This servant has not opened it. It isn't mine. Ming An looked at the box, looked at Aju. He placed his hand on the lid, paused, then thought, I'm living in his body. If not me, then who? He opened it. Inside was a small book, brown leather cover, pages already yellowed at the edges. A diary. Ming An spent nearly half a day reading Bai Ye's diary, not because the handwriting was difficult, but because he kept having to stop, set it down, look out the window, then pick it up again. The diary began when Bai Ye was 18, the year he first entered Shen Manor. Early pages, sparse, careful. But between those lines, Ming An read something he hadn't expected. Admiration. Bai Ye admired Shen Ling, not for power, for seeing someone do exactly what they believed was right, and do it far better than he ever could. The young lord ruled on a dispute in the lower county today. Everyone said the powerful side would win. He ruled the opposite. No explanation. He simply placed the evidence on the table and let people draw their own conclusions. I stood in the corner and watched, thinking that if it were me, I would not have dared. Ming An read that passage a second time, then turned the pages faster, hands beginning to feel unsteady. Around the year Bai Ye turned 21, the writing changed, shorter, more urgent. Ling Ke came to find me a third time. This time he didn't make an offer. He showed me something. My younger sister. He knows where she lives. He knows the road she takes to the market every morning. He knows the name of the person she loves. He said nothing more, just smiled and left. Ming An set the book down, turned the page. I cannot sleep. 3 nights now. Is there another way? There isn't. Either my sister or Shen Ling, I have already chosen. My hand is shaking as I write this. Then the next page, a single line. I'm sorry, with no indication of who it was written for. Ming An sat very still for a long time. A Jew stood in the corner. She didn't ask anything, just waited. He looked down at Bai Ye's hands, long, pale, flat on the desk. He thought about what he had written. Chapter 27. Bai Ye approaching Shen Ling with false warmth, thinking only of his own gain. Chapter 35. Handing information to the rival faction without hesitation. Chapter 48. Watching Shen Ling suffer because of the very information he had leaked and turning away. He had written that character without reason. Simply evil because the story needed someone to be evil. And the real person who had written, I have already chosen with trembling hands at 3 a.m. He had never bothered to think about a Jew. Bai Ye's younger sister. Is she safe? She was quiet for a long beat. After everything happened, this servant heard that she had left the capital, settled somewhere else. She is safe. Ming An nodded. That feeling, relief, and something squeezing in his chest at the same time, was the first feeling since transmigrating that was neither fear nor panic. It was guilt. 3 days later, Ming An had dodged the first plot point. The agent from the rival faction was turned away when he pretended to fall suddenly ill, while Eju stood at the door with genuine worry because she genuinely hadn't expected her master to think of this. The agent left, said he'd come back. He used the time he'd bought to research Ling Ke. In the original story, Ling Ke appeared exactly 7 times. Mid-ranking civil official, low-level henchman, 4.5 pages total. Ming An had looked up his name 3 times during the writing because he kept forgetting it. But when he laid out all the information he'd gathered and looked at it, something was wrong. Ling Ke had approached 3 different people simultaneously over 2 years, each believing they were the only one chosen. He knew details about Bai Ye's family that only someone inside the clan should know. He had been present at 3 seemingly unrelated events, each one later causing serious consequences for Shen Ling. Every time Ling Ke stood in the corner of the room, smiled, did nothing. The person who stands in the corner doing nothing is the person who doesn't need to, because everyone else is already doing it for them. A true villain doesn't need to act. A true villain builds the situation so that others destroy each other. In the original story, Shen Ling caused Bai Ye's death. Bai Ye forced Shen Ling to become ruthless, a tragic cycle he had thought was brilliant. But if you removed Ling Ke from that cycle, no pressure on Bai Ye's sister meant no betrayal. No betrayal meant no revenge. No revenge meant Shen Ling would never have become the cold, ruthless person he became. The entire story, from beginning to end, had been orchestrated by one person. Not Bai Ye, not Shen Ling, Ling Ke. I wrote the wrong villain. Not wrong in personality, wrong in placement. A Jew. Where in the capital is Ling Ke right now? She was quiet for a moment, deciding whether to ask why. Then, this servant will find out. On the 5th night since transmigrating, Ming An dreamed he often dreamed. Back when he was a writer, dreams had been his best source of inspiration. But tonight's dream was different. In the dream, he stood in a study, not Bai Ye's in the ancient world, not Ming An's rental apartment, somewhere in between. Candlelight, the smell of ink, the sound of wind outside. He was holding a brush, writing. But when he tried to read the characters, they blurred and smeared, wouldn't form complete sentences. Then came the sound of footsteps. Someone stepped into the room, face blurred, unclear. But the way they stood in the doorway looking in, familiar. Familiar enough to make his chest tighten, they said something. He couldn't make it out. He only saw their eyes, looking directly at him as though trying to say something very important and unable to find the words. He tried to move toward them. The candles went out. Ming An woke up, wooden ceiling, the smell of incense. The dream dissolved, but the feeling of familiarity remained. And then he realized something. This book, 3 years, 79 chapters, all from dreams. He had said it in interviews. I dreamed a story and wrote it down. But in those dreams, he was never standing outside looking in. He was inside the story, inside someone's body. A body that saw Shen Ling from eye level, that sat in this very study, held this very brush, heard those familiar footsteps coming down the hall. I didn't imagine Bai Ye. I was remembering him, not a writer's memory of a character. The memory of someone who had lived these things. He lay still until morning came. Couldn't fall back asleep. And in his mind, a question began to take shape. If I didn't imagine this story, then where did I know it from? 1 week after transmigrating, Ming An began to observe Shen Ling differently. Not to avoid him, but the way an author looks back at their manuscript trying to find where they went wrong. The opportunity came when Shen Ling stopped by unannounced. The kind of meeting Ming An had once summarized in a single sentence. The two met to discuss routine matters. But sitting here in reality, he began to see things that sentence didn't contain. Shen Ling was cold. That matched the original. But it was a selective coldness. He looked at the servant bringing tea with a neutral gaze, looked at Ming An with a measuring gaze, looked at the documents with a focused gaze. 3 different kinds of looking, subtle enough to miss if you weren't paying attention, not indifferent to everything. He had learned to only allow himself to care the right amount for the right person. Shen Ling was suspicious, and that also matched. But this wasn't innate. It was armor put on after being wounded enough times. There was one moment. A servant announced a letter from a familiar official. Shen Ling heard the name. And for a fraction of a second, something softened in his expression, immediately controlled and put back in place. Ming An wasn't sure anyone else had seen it, but he had. At the end of the meeting, Shen Ling paused at the door and turned back. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "No, it's nothing." "You always look at me that way, like you're looking at something that just surprised you." That was accurate. He looked at Shen Ling the way of someone who had just realized they'd misunderstood something very important for a very long time and was trying to read it again from the beginning. "Perhaps," Ming An said slowly, "because every time I look, I see something I hadn't seen before." Shen Ling was quiet for a beat, gave a small nod, then walked out. Ming An watched until his figure disappeared beyond the gate, then looked down at his own hands. "I wrote a person in pain and turned him into a cover character, and now I'm sitting in that person's world, watching him live, not knowing how to fix it, except, this time, to actually look at him. Look." It was Ming An's fault, entirely his fault. He had agreed to accompany Shen Ling on an inspection because Chapter 21 had this scene, thinking if everything played out as written, it would be easier to handle. He forgot one small detail. In Chapter 21, it didn't rain. The rain came down fast and heavy. The group scattered for shelter, and Shen Ling and Ming An ended up in a small roadside relay station. Just the two of them, no one else. The station was small, old, leaking in one corner. A barely alive fire, a cold pot of water, a few damp logs. Shen Ling sat down, back straight, hands on knees, looking out the door. Ming An lit the fire. 3 attempts because of the damp logs. Then sat down and realized Shen Ling didn't know what to do. Not helpless. But this person had always had a role in every situation. There was no entry in his mental catalog for this. So he sat, back straight, like someone waiting to be given an assignment. Ming An watched him for a moment, then started talking. Small things. The horse today had a habit of turning its head back to look at him with a judgmental expression. Whoever designed this relay station had serious problems with spatial reasoning if they put the leak directly over the hearth. Shen Ling didn't react for a long time. Then quietly, "Do you even know how to build a house?" "No." "Then be quiet." But there was no sharpness in his voice, just ordinary. The kind of person who says that not because they want silence, but because they don't know how else to join in. You don't have to know how to build a house to recognize a leaky roof. You don't have to be a carpenter to notice a chair with a broken leg. Shen Ling was quiet. Then, very softly, made a sound in his throat. Not quite a laugh, but not a laugh either. The water boiled. Ming An brewed tea and brought out 2 cups. "You're pouring tea for me? Who else would? The servants are sheltering from the rain. Can't exactly let you sit here thirsty." Shen Ling said nothing more, picked up the cup and drank the whole thing. Night fell. The rain didn't stop. They sat by the fire, talking occasionally, falling into silence occasionally. Not an uncomfortable silence, the kind between 2 people who don't need to constantly fill it. Ming An noticed. Shen Ling was gradually sitting less rigidly. Just a little, spine slightly less stiff, shoulders slightly less tense. Small enough to miss if you weren't looking, but Ming An was looking. Around the 3rd watch, Shen Ling closed his eyes. His breathing steadied quickly. He had actually fallen asleep. Shen Ling asleep looked nothing like Shen Ling awake. The constant calculation was gone from his face. The tension between his brows had eased. He looked younger, his actual age, not the age that responsibility and defensiveness had been adding to him day by day. My character, Ming An thought, is more tired than I wrote him. He pulled another log onto the fire, then sat there watching it burn, not thinking about anything at all. Just sat there. Strange, he thought vaguely. Why does it feel quieter when I stop thinking? 10 days after that rainy night, Ju came into the study, her expression slightly odd. Lord Shen is here. There's no appointment today. No, she paused. This is the 4th time in 10 days he's come without one. Ming An set down his brush. First visit, borrowed a book, sat drinking tea before leaving. Second, discussed court matters, stared out the window before leaving. Third, no explanation. 1 cup of tea, 3 sentences, left. Fourth, today. Please show him in. Shen Ling came in, sat down, and offered no explanation. Ming An poured tea, this time without spilling. Progress. Is there something you needed? No. Then, is there a rule that says I can only come if there's something to discuss? Ming An looked at him. Shen Ling looked back, completely calm. No, you don't need a reason. They sat in silence for a while. That evening, after Shen Ling left, Ming An reviewed everything he had written about the two of them. Chapters 1 through 79. Shen Ling used Bai Ye like a piece on the board. When Bai Ye betrayed him, Shen Ling's cruelty wasn't anger. It was simply the logic of discarding a broken piece. That was what Ming An had written. That was not what was happening. A person who comes 4 times in 10 days isn't doing it for utility. A person who stares out a window after a single question isn't there for information. That person is looking for something, and doesn't know how to say it directly. Shen Ling had never met the real Bai Ye. He was meeting him for the first time now, and he didn't know what to do with that. The next day, Deputy General Yang Kai, loyal, practical, with the permanently worried face of someone deep in debt, sought out Ju at the morning market. She reported it that afternoon. Deputy General Yang Kai asked whether young Master Bai had been doing anything unusual, because the young lord has been acting strangely lately. Strange how? The young lord has been staring out the window in the middle of court meetings. This has never happened before. What did you tell him? This servant said young Master Bai has also been a bit unusual lately, so the two sides are even. Ming An looked at Ju. She looked back, face perfectly straight. He coughed once. Right, thank you. It happened after a particularly tense court session. Shen Ling had been isolated, holding the line alone for 4 hours. He won, but winning like that leaves a person not entirely whole. That night, Shen Ling came to Bai Ye's manor. Ming An answered the door. A Jew had gone to sleep, she hadn't heard the knock, and found Shen Ling at the threshold. Robes intact, hair still in its bun, posture straight as a ruler. But there was a dark stain on his left sleeve, spreading down from the elbow. Blood. You're injured? Minor. As calm as reporting the weather. Come in. He had no medical training. This was an immediate practical problem when he stood before Shen Ling holding Bai Ye's medicine box and realized he couldn't identify most of what was in it. Basic principles. What does a wound need? Clean it, bandage it, no infection. I've watched enough modern medical dramas, he hoped. He cleaned the wound and bandaged it in the way a modern person was taught, not in the way of ancient Chinese medicine. You do this strangely, Shen Ling said. No less effective. I didn't say less effective, I said strange. Ming An kept working. His hands weren't shaking. When there's a specific task to do, anxiety tends to go somewhere else. The silence in the room wasn't uncomfortable. The kind of silence of late night and a single candle and 2 people who don't need to speak to know the other is there. When he tied the final knot, he looked up. Shen Ling was looking at him. Not the familiar measuring gaze. A different look. One he had no name for. like a person looking at something they aren't sure is real, but don't want to look away from in case it disappears. "You're not like before," Shen Ling said. His voice was quieter than usual. "The one before? Who were they?" Shen Ling was silent, long enough that Ming An thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I never knew either." Not an answer to the question. A truer answer than an answer to the question. Ming An felt something shift faintly in his chest. Not a large feeling. Small, like a grain of sand rolling to one side in the palm of a hand. But he noticed it. The next morning, Ming An went to Shen Manor. He walked down the corridor and stopped in front of the study door. The door was ajar. He lifted his hand to knock, then stopped. Inside, Shen Ling stood beside the desk, holding an old piece of paper, edges yellowed, creases worn soft. He wasn't reading anymore, just looking at it, the way a person stares at a fixed point when their mind is somewhere else. He didn't knock, because he could see Shen Ling's face. Shen Ling wasn't crying. No tears, no trembling shoulders, just his eyes were wet. And he stood still, letting them be wet, not hiding it because there was no one watching. Then Ming An looked more closely at the paper. Small handwriting. A familiar hand. It was Bai Ye's handwriting. Later, through a Jew's investigation, Ming An learned the full story. Before the betrayal, the original Bai Ye had written a letter to Shen Ling, not an explanation, not asking for forgiveness, just telling the truth. About Ling Ke, about his sister being threatened, about having no other choice. He had asked someone to deliver it before everything happened. The letter never arrived. Ling Ke had intercepted it, held onto it. Because if Shen Ling had read it first, the plan would have collapsed. Bai Ye would never have been pushed into acting alone. Ling Ke had held that letter for years. Yesterday, during an internal purge following the court session, Shen Ling's people found it by chance. Shen Ling read that letter for the first time, years after the day it had been written. Ming An stood outside for a very long time, then stepped back. Didn't knock. Didn't go in. He went out to the courtyard, sat on the stone steps, and looked up at the sky. Bai Ye had written the letter, had tried to tell the truth, and no one had heard. Shen Ling hadn't known, had carried that not knowing, and everything that came with it, for years, right up until today. Ling Ke, Ming An thought, feeling something that for the first time wasn't just worry or analysis, but real anger. You took from two people what they should have had. He sat for a while longer. Let the anger settle into something harder, clearer. The thing people usually call resolve. Ling Ke came on an ordinary afternoon. No announcement. Someone who holds all the right cards doesn't need to be polite. He walked into the reception hall as though it were his own home, sat down without being invited, and looked at Ming An with the smile of a person who knows they're holding the better hand. Ling Ke looked completely ordinary. Pleasant face, unhurried manner, warm voice. Nothing memorable, nothing alarming. That is precisely what makes him dangerous. Young Master Bai is looking well. Haven't seen you around much lately. Busy. Yes, busy. Busy staying close to Lord Shen. I hear the two of you have grown quite close. Is there something you need? There is. He placed his hand on the table, light, unhurried. The time has come for young Master Bai to fulfill his commitment. What commitment? The one before you made a promise to me. You've taken his place, the promise comes with it. Ming An listened to Ling Ke lay out what he wanted. Internal information from Shen Manor, the timing and location of an important transfer, Shen Ling's signature on a specific document. Each piece small enough to seem harmless, but assembled together, they would push Shen Ling into a position he couldn't recover from. This is exactly the original story. He's following every step I wrote. What if I refuse? Ling Ke reached into his sleeve and placed something on the table. A small piece of paper, a name, an address, a daily schedule. Bai Ye's younger sister. She's living peacefully there. I'd like her to continue living peacefully. I imagine young master would want that too. Ming An looked at the paper, looked at the name, looked at the address. In his mind, Bai Ye's diary. Either my sister or Shen Ling. I have already chosen. My hand is shaking as I write this. That person had had shaking hands. 3 sleepless nights, had chosen his sister because there was no other choice. Now it was Ming An's turn. Ling Ke waited, unhurried, with the ease of a person who knows they're winning. Do it. At least that buys more time. Don't do it. Everything falls apart right now. Do it, and Shen Ling dies slowly, step by step. Ming An looked up, looked directly at Ling Ke's face. That smile was still there, warm, calm, completely certain of the outcome. I need to find a third path, not comply, not refuse and wait. Something else, something that isn't in the original story. Give me 3 days. To think it over? To arrange things. What you're asking requires time to prepare. Ling Ke looked at him for a moment, then nodded, stood, straightened his robes. 3 days. I'm patient. He walked out. The door closed. Ming An sat alone, looked at the paper on the table. 3 days. No plan, no backup, nothing but 3 days and a name on a piece of paper, and the feeling of being pushed into exactly the corner he had built in the original story. A Jew. She appeared from behind the folding screen. This servant heard everything. Good. Do you know the way to Shen Manor? She looked at him. In her eyes, something close to finally. Yes. Tonight I need to see Shen Ling. Not tomorrow. Tonight. He looked down at the paper one last time. Thought of the original Bai Ye, shaking hands, 3 sleepless nights, choosing to carry everything alone because he didn't know there was another choice. He didn't know. But I do. I've written enough stories to know a trap only works when the person inside it doesn't tell anyone. So, tell him. That night, Ming An went to Shen Manor. No appointment, no official reason, only a Jew leading the way, and Ling Ke's note hidden inside his sleeve, heavy as stone. Shen Ling met him in the study, inner robes loose, hair not fully tied yet, clearly dragged out of sleep, but he didn't look annoyed, only studied Ming An for a moment. Sit. I'm fine standing. You look like you're about to collapse. Ming An sat down anyway. He told him everything. What Ling Ke wanted, what he had done, the letter that never arrived, all the things the original Bai Ye never got the chance to say. He spoke out of order, whatever came to mind first. Shen Ling never interrupted once. He only listened. When Ming An finished, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Outside, there was only the sound of wind. How do you know all this? What matters is whether it's true. Shen Ling looked at him for another second. It is. Another silence. Then, why tell me? Ming An froze because he couldn't tell the truth, couldn't say that. He had written this man for 3 years without ever truly understanding him. Couldn't say that. Seeing Shen Ling hold that letter had hurt more than he could bear. In the end, he only said softly, because some things can't be fixed anymore if they stay unsaid. Shen Ling looked at him for a very long time, then nodded. I understand. He stood and walked toward the desk. His mind was already moving ahead, calculating the next step. But before picking up the brush, he said quietly, Thank you for coming. His voice stayed calm. But Ming An knew. For Shen Ling, those words had not been easy to say. The moment Ming An stood up, the world tilted. No warning. The lantern light blurred. Inside his head came a roaring sound, like thousands of pages turning at once. Bai Ye. Shen Ling's voice sounded very far away. Ming An collapsed. In the haze, he saw 2 places at the same time. One was Shen Ling's study. The other was Nguyen Min An's tiny apartment in the modern world. The laptop was still on. The coffee cup still sat beside it, as if time there had never moved. He stood between the 2 worlds, tried to walk toward either side. Couldn't. Then a voice echoed inside his head. The original story has been broken. You can go back. Ming An looked toward his apartment. His old life was there. Familiar. Ordinary. His. Then he looked back toward the study, blurrier now, farther away, but there was still someone standing beside the place where he had fallen. Shen Ling. And through that haze, someone called his name. Not Ming An, not Bai Ye, a name he didn't recognize. But the moment he heard it, his chest ached like he had heard it 1,000 times before. He met Bai Ye in the dream. There was no setting, only pale light, and the two of them standing face to face. Bai Ye looked at him. Same face, different eyes. This man wore that face like it had always belonged to him. You told him? Yeah, thank you. Ming An shook his head. I should be the one apologizing. Bai Ye stayed quiet for a moment, then said softly, A writer never truly understands everything about the person they write. You're not angry? I was. A faint smile touched his lips. But you saw the things I wanted someone to see. That's enough. Ming An looked at the man in front of him, then asked the thing he wanted to know most. How did you know I would come? Bai Ye watched him for a long time. Only then did he answer. Because you wrote me. And the person who wrote me was always me. The space fell completely silent. Ming An felt his heartbeat slowing down. What do you mean? I mean, Bai Ye said quietly, the dreams you used to write this story weren't imagination. You didn't create me. You were only remembering me. Ming An stood frozen. The dreams, the strange familiarity, the way he had looked at Shen Ling the first time they met, the way reading Bai Ye's journal had felt like reading himself. Not author and character. One person, living across 2 lifetimes. I didn't transmigrate into a story. Ming An's voice came out barely above a whisper. I came back. Bai Ye looked at him. For the first time, he smiled. This time, he said softly, Don't lose it again. The light around them began to dissolve. You have to go back now. Back where? To the place where someone is waiting for you. Bai Ye. Ming An reached out, but the other man was already fading into the light. Only his distant voice remained. This time, live well. Then everything turned white. Ming An woke up 3 days later. The first person he saw was Aju. Her eyes were red. Young master. Her voice sounded rough, like she hadn't slept in days. How long was I out? 3 days. Ming An fell silent. Where's Shen Ling? Outside. Outside? Aju nodded. He stayed here the entire time. Ming An stopped breathing for a second. He never went back? No. Aju set the medicine bowl onto the table. I told him it wasn't necessary. He said it wasn't my place to decide. The room went quiet. Ming An lowered his gaze to the bowl in his hands, thought about Bai Ye, thought about the dream, thought about those words. This time, don't lose it again. Aju. Yes? Tell Shen Ling, he said softly. I want to see him. Shen Ling stepped into the room. His expression looked as calm as ever. Only the exhaustion beneath his eyes gave him away. Are you feeling better? I'm fine. Silence stretched between them. Then Ming An took a breath. There's something I need to tell you. Go ahead. I'm not Bai Ye. The room fell completely still. I came from another world. The person who used to be here wasn't me. Ming An stopped speaking and waited. Waited for suspicion, for disbelief, for questions. But Shen Ling only looked at him, then quietly said, I know. Ming An stared at him. You know? Since when? The first day. Shen Ling glanced toward the window. You spilled tea. That's it? Not just that. He looked back at Ming An. You looked at me like we had never met before. Bai Ye would never look at me that way. Silence. Then Shen Ling continued. You called yourself I. You sat cross-legged. You said I was better looking than you expected. A tiny pause. Bai Ye would never say that. Ming An looked at him for a long time. You knew all along and never asked? This time, Shen Ling stayed quiet longer. Finally, he answered softly, because you looked at me differently. How differently? Like I was a real person. His voice stayed calm, but Ming An felt something tighten in his chest. You didn't look at me like a tool, or someone to keep your guard up around. You looked at me. He paused slightly. Like an ordinary person. Outside the window, morning light slowly slid across the floor. Shen Ling spoke again, very quietly. I didn't want you to stop. Silence. Then a faint, self-mocking smile. That's selfish. It's not. Ming An looked at him. You've just never been looked at that way before. Shen Ling didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. I'll still look at you that way, whether you know who I am or not. Why? The question came out soft. Ming An thought of Bai Ye, thought of the letter that never arrived, thought of two people who had stayed beside each other for too long without ever truly understanding one another. Then he said quietly, because some things don't begin in just one lifetime. Shen Ling looked at him for a very long time, then finally, very slowly, he nodded. The two of them sat in silence inside the room filled with morning light. Neither spoke again. But for the first time, both of them truly knew who the other was. 3 days later, Shen Manor sent over a small wooden box. No letter, no explanation, only that it had been found in an old storage room. Inside was an old manuscript, yellowed pages, worn leather binding. Ming An opened the first page, then froze. The title written there was the exact title of the novel he had written in the modern world. Not a single word was different. He read from morning until night. It wasn't a novel. It was a diary, a memoir written by Shen Ling in his previous life. After everything ended, after Bai Ye died, every page was filled with regret. I didn't believe him. Not because he wasn't trustworthy, but because I had grown too used to trusting no one. Ming An read slowly, like he was afraid to miss even one word. Then he realized Shen Ling from that lifetime had written all of this for one person to read, for Bai Ye, for him. The last page was a loose sheet of paper, the handwriting shakier than before. If you are reading this, then I waited for the right person. Please don't leave again. Below it was Bai Ye's seal. Ming An turned the page over. In the corner was a single line written in modern handwriting. His handwriting. I'll come back. Ming An stared at those words for a very long time. He didn't remember writing them, but he knew they were his. I'll come back. He had made that promise, and somehow, he really had returned. That night, the memories returned. Not in fragments this time. Everything came back at once. In his previous life, Bai Ye had discovered Ling Kei's scheme. He had been forced to work for Ling Kei because of his younger sister, but all the while, he had secretly gathered evidence. He wanted to give everything to Shen Ling. The first letter was intercepted. The second time, he went to Shen Manor himself. But it was already too late. Ling Kei had prepared all the false evidence. Bai Ye stood before Shen Ling and told him the entire truth, held nothing back, even the ugliest parts. Shen Ling listened to all of it, then didn't believe him. Not because he was foolish, but because he had been betrayed too many times before. And because Ling Kei's plan had been flawless. The memories hurt so badly Ming An could barely breathe. Bai Ye died by Shen Ling's hand, without resisting, without resentment, only thinking. At least I said everything I needed to say. 3 months later, Shen Ling discovered the truth, all because of one tiny mistake Ling Kei made. And suddenly, every word Bai Ye had spoken became real. That night, Shen Ling sat alone in his study, didn't sleep, didn't speak, didn't know what to do with the fact that the person he killed had been innocent. After that, he kept living, did everything right, carried all of it with him. At the end of his life, he wrote the entire story down, for someone who might never even read it. And on the last page, he copied a sentence he himself didn't understand why he remembered. "I'll come back." Near dawn, Ming An was still staring at the ceiling. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to brighten. There was only one thing on his mind now. He wanted to see Shen Ling immediately.
Ming An arrived at Shen Manor early in the morning. Shen Ling was already in the study. The moment he saw Ming An, he set his brush down. Ming An placed the manuscript onto the table. "Have you read it yet?" "No." "Do you know who wrote it?"
Shen Ling looked at the manuscript. "No, it was you." Silence. "You from your previous life." Ming An told him everything, the memories. Bai Ye, the truth that the novel he wrote in the modern world had never been fiction. "It was your memory," he said softly. "You sent it through dreams, and somehow it reached me." The room stayed silent for a long time. Shen Ling rested a hand on the old cover, very gently, as if afraid of damaging it. "So," he said slowly, "I brought you here. You didn't mean to, but I still did. I don't blame you." Shen Ling looked at him. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Ming An smiled faintly. "If you hadn't sent this story out, I never would have made it here." Morning sunlight slowly filled the study. Shen Ling looked at the manuscript for a little longer, then quietly said, "Thank you for reading it." Ling Ke didn't lose easily. His crimes had been exposed. Ming An and Shen Ling spent 2 weeks gathering evidence, carefully, without missing a single detail. In the end, Ling Ke was brought before the imperial court. He listened to every accusation, then smiled. This was his final move. A flawless set of forged documents. Their contents. Bai Ye had willingly colluded with foreign forces, committed treason by choice. The signature, the witnesses. Everything was perfect enough to leave no room for argument, according to court law. Shen Ling had to execute Bai Ye. Otherwise, he would be accused of protecting a traitor. Ling Ke looked at Shen Ling calmly, as if he understood the man before him better than anyone else. "You'll follow the law. You've always been that kind of person." The entire court fell silent. Shen Ling held the forged documents and read them from beginning to end, expressionless, unhurried. Ming An stood below and watched him, then realized there was no hesitation in Shen Ling's eyes, no wavering, only a decision that had already been made long ago. The grand hall fell completely silent. Shen Ling rose to his feet. A servant brought over the ceremonial sword. He took it, then slowly walked down until he stood in front of Ming An. Everyone was watching. Ling Ke still stood quietly in the corner, smiling. Shen Ling stopped before Ming An. The sword remained sheathed. The two of them looked at each other. No one spoke, but Ming An understood. In the last life, Shen Ling failed to keep Bai Ye alive. This time, he would not make the same mistake again. Then Shen Ling turned the sword around, not toward Ming An, toward himself. "All of this evidence is forged." His voice echoed through the hall. "Bai Ye is innocent. And if this court still demands a life..." His hand tightened around the hilt. "Then I will trade mine." The entire hall froze. No one expected Shen Ling to go this far. Even Ling Ke faltered for the first time. Then one official stepped forward, then another and another, the people who had followed Shen Ling long enough to understand he would never wager his life on something he did not believe in. Ling Ke was arrested inside the hall. His final plan collapsed completely. The real evidence was presented. The witnesses changed their testimony one by one. The forged signature was compared and exposed. Everything fell apart piece by piece. Ling Ke was escorted past Ming An. He paused for a moment, looked at him for a long time. "Young Master Bai," he said softly, "you are not the same as I remember." "Yeah." Ming An met his gaze directly. "I'm not." Ling Ke was taken away. This time, he never looked back. That same afternoon, Shen Ling personally submitted a memorial to the court to restore Bai Ye's honor, not only in this life, but also the injustice of the last one. The court approved it. Bai Ye's name was finally returned to him clean and whole. That night, Aju told Ming An everything that had happened. Shen Heir did something not many people could do. Ming An looked out the window. A long time passed before he quietly said, "I know." He lowered his head and looked at his hands, then smiled faintly. "Maybe. I gave this person the wrong ending for far too long." A month later, autumn arrived without Ming An noticing. Only when he saw golden leaves drifting past the window did he realize nearly a year had passed. Shen Ling entered the study, placed the old manuscript on the table, then sat across from him. "Do you resent me?" His voice was calm as always. "For bringing you here?" "No." Ming An answered almost immediately. "I don't." "Why?" Ming An fell silent for a moment, thinking about the novel he once wrote, thinking about Bai Ye, thinking about the rainy night at the relay station, thinking about the person who sat outside his room for 3 days without leaving. "If you hadn't sent that story away," he said softly, "I never would have come here, and I never would have realized." He looked at Shen Ling, that there was someone I wrote about for 3 years without ever truly seeing. The room fell quiet. Outside the window, golden leaves drifted silently downward. "This time," Ming An continued, "I want to write the ending myself. Not the original story, not the previous life, but the ending for this one." "What kind of ending?" "I don't know yet." Ming An laughed softly. "But for the first time, I'm writing without knowing how it ends. And somehow, I'm okay with that." Shen Ling looked at him for a long time, then quietly said, "Then write. I'll wait." Ming An picked up the brush. This time, he was not writing the original story, not writing the past, only the first line of something new. Outside the window, golden leaves drifted through the autumn wind. Shen Ling sat across from him, drinking tea, not urging him on, not asking questions, simply staying there. Somewhere very far away and very close, the laptop screen inside the old apartment suddenly lit up. The Word file opened by itself. The cursor blinked in the middle of an empty page, then words slowly appeared. "And this time, no one has to die alone." The file saved itself. The screen went dark. Inside Bai Manor's study, Ming An set down his brush, then looked up. Shen Ling was still watching him. "Finished?" "Just started." "Then keep going." Ming An looked at the person before him, the person who had waited far too long. Luckily, this time, he still had enough time to say everything left unsaid. He lowered his head and kept writing. Ling Ke realized Bai Ye had changed very early on. The new person called himself I, sat cross-legged, had much worse handwriting, and looked at Shen Ling like someone seeing him for the first time. Ling Ke wrote everything down, without panic, because this was not the first time. He had seen this happen 3 times before. New people, appearing inside old bodies, terrified, trying to change everything, only to end up trapped in the same snare he prepared for them. To Ling Ke, people were not important. Situations were, as long as the trap was perfect enough. It did not matter who stepped into it. This was the 4th time, and he believed the outcome would stay the same. The only thing that unsettled him was Ming An's gaze. The previous 3 looked at him like a threat. This one was different. Ming An looked at him like a problem, something that could be solved. Ling Ke brushed the feeling aside, not worth worrying about. After all, no one had ever broken his plans 4 times in a row. What he did not know was this. Ming An never intended to follow the old story. He simply wrote an entirely different one. The story ends happily. Ming An stayed, Shen Ling stayed, and in the end, everything finally returned to where it belonged. But there is still one person I cannot forget. The original Bai Ye. The person who chose his sister over himself. The person who wrote an apology letter that was never delivered. The person who died at the hands of the one he wanted most to trust him. And also the person who stepped aside and so someone else could have the chance to fix everything. So what do you think? Is this truly a happy ending? Or was Bai Ye simply the one who paid the price for everyone else's happiness?